Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We are for one of our virtual speaker series. We haven't done these all summer, and we've been trying to get this one together, but summer happens and everyone gets busy, so we're finally here. So this one is, there are no Muslim creatives in Ottawa. We scratch out there are no, because here we are, Muslim creators in Ottawa. Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. On behalf of Digi60, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which we are on is on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Please take a moment to learn about the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation and to learn about their history, concerns, and work as a community. We believe that the path to reconciliation includes learning and understanding these concerns directly from them, as well as a concerted effort for settlers and the government to make active work towards righting the historical injustices that have faced First Nations people. So thank you all again for joining me. If you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. We will take questions at the end in the last 15 minutes. You can ask them throughout, and I may pop in to see, well, depending on how much time we have, but at the end of the day, it'll be about the 15 minutes towards the end. So I'm going to start with introductions. We have GJ Jeffrey, who is a fiction writer, and her short story, Family Parade, was published in an anthology series by Diaspora's Dialogues, writing in the new city. I can't speak today, I'm so sorry. Writing in the new city. She's currently working on a screenplay. Sanita Fejik is an award-winning Bosnian-Canadian writer, poet, novelist, and playwright. At the age of 7, after experiencing the siege of Sarajevo, she fled the Balkan War and genocide of her Muslim Bosnian people. Seema Haider is a contemporary digital artist and writer based in Ottawa. As a first-generation Canadian, a wife, and mother of 4, her art pays homage to her South Asian heritage. So I'll get you each, I'll start with Sanita. I'll get you to talk a bit about yourself. I know you had like some interesting history and a bit of a history lesson for a lot of us that I'd love you to speak on.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here and allowing me to be part of this. It's actually taken me a really long time to remember my Muslim heritage because, as you said in my bio, I'm from Bosnia, and Bosnia is a very, very young country. I was actually born in communist Yugoslavia. And after it dissolved, it became several different countries. And when my Socialist Republic, Bosnia, voted for independence, there was a genocide because the majority of its population is Muslim. But our sister countries, particularly Serbia and Croatia, had other plans for Bosnia. A genocide started, and the plan was essentially to pluck every Muslim out of the Balkan land and split my country in two, the north going to Serbia and the south going to Croatia. And I don't know if you were watching this in the 1990s on TV, we just kept hoping that the West would intervene, that Clinton would do something, because this was Europe, and there was no way after World War II that Europe would allow another genocide. But it just kept going on, and I think the reason why it kept going on is because there's this kind of ideal of a Christian Europe, and it's just really difficult for the West to kind of admit that there is a indigenous Muslim population that exists in Europe, because Bosnians have been Muslim since the 14th century, since the Ottoman Empire invaded. So for me, growing up in that context where it was just really dangerous to be Muslim, I remember going from, reciting the Bismillah every day with my grandmother to my mom telling us to not tell people we were Muslim because it was dangerous. And so I grew up a refugee across 3 countries in Europe before immigrating to Canada. And I just kind of, as a child, you just kind of take what's given to you without understanding. So just kind of erase that part of me. And then, of course, after 9/11, and since my skin is white and I'm white passing, there's just no question about it. I just kind of hid that. And only recently have I been kind of reconnecting with my heritage and claiming it for myself. So that's kind of a quick history lesson of Bosnia. And yeah, I'll let the others speak a little, introduce themselves.
Well, a lot of people don't know that. And I think, like we had talked about, how a lot of people just assume that, when you're Muslim, you have to be, Middle Eastern or South Asian. And so we're getting a lot of questions about asking if you're a convert. And I think that's.
Well, Mason, I'm so glad you're asking about it, because I think that's part of this Western agenda of othering Muslims, right? Mm-hmm. So if they're beyond your borders, then they're necessarily others. I did come in as a refugee, mm-hmm. but I think the West has a very particular reason for othering Muslims and keeping them outside of their borders.
Yeah.
But the truth is, like, Muslims have existed in and of the West, and that's what Bosnians are. And that's why when the genocide started, the first thing that was destroyed was our Oriental Institute, with manuscripts that showed that Islam was flourishing and existing in Bosnia and in Europe for the last 600 years. So killing that trace, erasing that trace, and literally wiping off the population is part of that. And as I myself have been reading the history books and understanding what happened to my country, myself and my people, I realized that if I let go of my Muslim difference, then the genocide has succeeded. They have succeeded in wiping out Muslims if I don't claim at least to be part of Muslim heritage. Even though I don't practice the religion, I still keep those traditions with me and those values, those transcendental values that are very beautiful. So again, it's just really grateful to be part of this conversation and to be included as I'm allowing myself to claim part of my heritage.
Well, we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Seema, go to you.
Hey, well, I don't feel like I should go after that. That was a lot. Very fascinating, Sunita. I would love to hear more about that. For myself, as Mesa was mentioning, I'm a mother of 4. I have 3 that are teenagers and young adults, and then a young 10-year-old. I'm also a wife and an artist in many respects. So I'm a makeup artist for the last 22 years and a hair artist, and I primarily work in the South Asian community. And I am also an artist in digital media and mixed media. So I am actually just recently started delving into the possibility of doing illustration, and maybe in the future, maybe animation. We'll see where it takes me, but it's something I've just started doing. And yeah, that's basically where I am. In terms of where I come from, I was born and raised in Canada. Mostly I've spent all my time in Ontario, going from like city to city. So eventually ended up in Ottawa, but I was born and raised in Toronto. My background is Indian Pakistani. And I think that gives me a unique perspective also because my parents were of the older generation. So my father was part of the model minority. So him coming into Toronto in 1967, and also my parents were a part of the 1947 independence from India and Pakistan. So it's a very unique perspective that I kind of want to explore with my art. So I do portrait art as well, but I'm starting to move into illustration more.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I love when people include their cultures and their heritage in their artwork. And we'll talk about a bit more about that after, but and I'd like to know how your parents also think about your work in art.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get into that for sure.
GJ, let's hear about you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Guljoya, and I am from Toronto, like Seema, and also of South Asian background, like Seema. I've been in Ottawa for a couple of decades now. I work for the Federal Public Service, and I'm also a writer. I started writing when I was very young, and I was reflecting a bit on this as I was preparing for this session. And I grew up, or I didn't speak any English until I went to school. And one of the things that really opened up a lot of worlds for me was when I started to read, and books and stories just opened up whole new worlds. And I think that's one of the channels, as not just an immigrant kid that didn't speak English, but as a kid that was shy. Books were just such a source of wonder. And so being able to tell stories is just really, something that brings me joy. Don't know what else to add right now, but maybe as we go along, I can speak more to my process with my writing and how it connects as well to my identity.
Yeah, of course. Definitely we'll delve into it. We'll have more of a conversation and we'll pull more out of you. So my first question is, so what is your Muslim identity mean to you in your art? Whoever wants to go first, we can. See my.
So I think for me, it's a combination of my Muslim identity as well as my South Asian background. I think I relate more to being South Asian in Canada, because I would call myself a very moderate Muslim. But I think that it really colors everything that I do. So having a South Asian background has been something that, you know, dealing with racism growing up, dealing with, you know, colorism, dealing with so many things that we all have to deal with as having a minority background, basically. It's kind of something that I really wanted to explore in my art. I also do writing as well. So we'll see how that kind of plays out. I think the pandemic has really given me some time to like experiment a little bit. So I'm kind of playing around with what I can do with it. But the idea basically is to hopefully inspire other young women, primarily young women of South Asian background, and help them to, you know, navigate being in a North American culture, which is something that I really struggled with because I felt like I had one foot in one culture and one foot in the other. So that's where it's coming from, basically. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Well, like
Okay.
your identity, and like, yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And you find that you with your 4 kids, do you find that they as well like want to their identity as a Muslim? I'm assuming your children are Muslim.
Yes.
And like, do they grow up with that, and do they want to incorporate that in their world? And
I would say definitely they are. So I have one daughter. She's our oldest and the only girl. And then we have 3 boys. And the difference between them is pretty interesting. Like she's the young adult in the family. And I think she's probably the more, so we use the word desi to describe South Asian culture and stuff. And I'd say she's the more desi one out of the kids. The boys are, but I guess it's the you know, the double standard that kind of is there, that guys can get away with not being as religious, quote unquote, as the girl. The girl has to be a little bit more wrapped up inside her culture and her religion and stuff like that. I think it's interesting to watch because I've also studied psychology. So it's really interesting to watch from a few different perspectives. So one being first generation Canadian, whereas my children are second generation, or technically 1.5 generations because my husband's an immigrant. But my kids always call him out on that. But you know, to be able to see how much more comfortable they are in their own skin and how much I wasn't, that's really interesting to watch. And then I'm also an only child, and they're 4 children, and my husband is also one of 4. So that's a very interesting juxtaposition to watch as well. I find in all situations that my kids seem to be a lot more comfortable in their own skin and in their own knowledge of who they are. They don't seem to feel like they have to apologize for very much, whereas I felt like I always did. So yeah,
I totally get that. Anyone wants to go next? Sunita, yeah, I know you have something going on.
I do, and I'm really excited to talk about it. So obviously for me, the Muslim Bosniak experience is something that I want to represent. As a writer, in my first novella, I had a Balkan character, but it was just, there was very little identity politics. It was situated, a novella has happened very quickly. They're a different kind of form than it's kind of like a short film versus like a long feature. You know, you just can't do as much in it. And I have a play that will be staged at the Great Canadian Theatre Company, the GCTC in Westboro. and I'm really excited about it. It runs from February 1st to February 13th, and it's about a Bosnian Canadian family that was, refugee, immigrant turned settler family. And the kind of clashes, the intergenerational clashes, Asima touched on it a little bit, but the intergenerational clashes, even some of the kids were born in the siege, some of them were born refugees in Europe, and one of them was born in Canada. And they're three very different characters. And for me, it's always important to represent plurality within the family. And I do that with a lot of sensitivity, because representation can sometimes function and come off as a kind of truth telling about Muslims, or like an umbrella term, when in reality, there's just so much plurality, even within a family unit, And so there's always like a practicing Muslim, those that are less practicing, those that are moderate, and those that can get away with kind of being in between. Usually, anyway, in Bosnia, it is the male figure. And so for me, it's really difficult to do this work, because I don't know where I belong. Because on the one hand, I don't want to let go of my Muslim heritage, because that means that the genocide has succeeded. On the other, I'm not practicing, even though I have a lot of faith. My faith comes closer to like the God of Spinoza or Karen Barad, who's like a physicist and a feminist. So I have a lot of faith, but I don't have any religion. So I don't know where to position myself. And yet at the same time, I've gone through phases where, like, as a child, I truly believed, and I just had absolutely no doubt. And then with the trauma of the genocide, that switched. And so I'm allowing myself to have multiple selves as well, and multiple perspectives on this. And I think having families as the vehicle is a great space, because you can just kind of express the differences within a dysfunctional family unit. And it's just a lot of fun to write like that. So yeah, I don't know where I belong exactly, because on top of that, I'm also a lesbian. And I think although the West has a very sometimes flattening representation of Muslims, that within the Muslim communities, because it's a plurality, right? Sometimes you feel like if you're queer that you don't belong and you're not permitted to be part of that. On the other hand, some queer Muslims or some feminist Muslim really feel that they can belong in there. Whereas I just don't know. And I'm in that space of like having multiple perspectives and different positionalities, and allowing myself to be comfortable in the mess of it all.
I totally, I relate to that. I relate to that, like, I mean, the plurality, I can't even speak today, plurality. And like, I were 6 kids in my family, and we all practice different ways. And I think that this umbrella where everyone feels that Muslims, or because we're represented in one way in the media, everyone feels like we should be like hijabis and we should be a certain way. I'm like, and as everyone can see here, we're not like that. And so that you can see that there's so much diversity in, the Muslim community. And I agree with you. Sometimes I don't know where I stand in my spirituality, my religion, and because I grew up with some like religious trauma as well, and on the home front, and very different than what you went through, but still in the sense where like, where do I fit in? And I feel like a lot of us kind of go through that, and I agree where you should allow yourself to sit with it. And not let anyone else dictate where you should be in the religion. Because I had mentioned this to Seema the other day, whereas TikTok has this like huge, toxic energy with some Muslims who are targeting, queer Muslims or feminist Muslims, and like, oh, you're not a Muslim because you're not wearing a hijab, or you're not a Muslim because you're queer, or you're not a Muslim because your neck is showing. Like, there's so much of that, and that's in our own community, and we're also getting from the outside of the community, and you're like, where do I fit in? So I totally relate to that.
I just want to say thank you for sharing that, because it allows other Muslims and other people who might like be of Muslim heritage but might not be practicing, or might be practicing in their own way, permission to just kind of exist and be part of the conversation. And some of the stuff I hear on social media is just so violent and rigid that you're like, okay, like, you just don't know where to stand, and it's very hard to have conversation that's full of compassion and the values of Islam with personalities like that.
Absolutely. And they're trying to be like, this is the religion, you have to follow this way. And you're like, but are you really, following the religion? Are you really practicing? Because like you're saying, it's supposed to be with compassion, and that's not coming off from some people. And it's very unfortunate because we should be united as a community because we are being othered and put on the outside. So, and I may get some hate for bringing this up, but I feel like it's an honest conversation that we should be having about it. So, this is a safe space for us to be who we want to be in our Muslim identity. And I feel like that we should be allowed to be who we are in our own Muslim identity without having someone else dictate what it should be.
I have to agree with that for sure. Like back to our conversation that we had the other day, I feel like people seem to, I don't know if it's that they forget or they deny, but they seem to forget that it's a relationship with a higher power and it has nothing to do with anyone else. So whatever my relationship is with God or whatever I see as God is between me and God. I don't know why people seem to have this, I guess it's idealistic for me to think that way. I don't know, but I feel like people having an opinion on how anyone else should live has never been part of, in my opinion, it has never been part of any religion. So it should not, especially if it's a monotheistic religion, it should not be part of the conversation because it's a personal thing that's going on inside my own jihad, my own struggle with how to live my life. It's my own thing. Nobody else should say whether I'm doing it right or wrong or whatever. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%. GJ. Oh, sorry, Seema, did you?
No,
last
fine.
note? Okay.
Go ahead. No.
I just wanted to get to GJ talking about where your Muslim identity falls in your artistic work.
Sure, but just to comment on just this last round of the conversation, I hear a lot of what all of you are saying, and I've been through a lot of that as well. I'll share some resources and links with both of you. My sense, Anita, is I've found some of those middle ground spaces where, you know, I can have that safe space and question and explore religious identity without being shamed or blamed. And unfortunately, I think in all religious communities, Muslim and otherwise, you know, there are those hard spaces of judgment. And what gets challenging, and I think where we get pulled into this space of the middle, is where we have the broader kind of Islamophobia out there, and then we're dealing with you know, that kind of common rigidity that we'll also find in Christianity or Judaism or any other faith as well, and trying to negotiate that. But there have been growing spaces that are a lot more safe, and I know that I've found that a lot as, you know, a source of comfort, as well as to be just not engaging with some of the other channels where it just sucks energy instead of giving energy. But in terms of my own identity and my writing, it's been interesting how that's evolved, because initially, you know, I was writing as a teenager, I was writing things about like mysteries or, and the character's identity was never really talked about. And I think it was part of my own journey of coming to terms with and being comfortable to talk about my identity, because back in high school, it wasn't safe to be able to talk about it. And then over time, I have written a lot of stories featuring young Muslim protagonists. And again, I think that was part of a process of working through my own journey as well. And then, you know, I've written some very different things where my first male protagonist is a young Hindu man in India who wants to be a Bollywood star. And, you know, it channels more about my South Asian identity than my religious one. But I'm finding now, both in terms of what I see out there on the screen and in writing, and where I want to take my own work as well, is for it not to be focused on those explorations of identity. I feel like that's being done a lot, and it's good to have it, but I just feel like it's the only thing that we tend to see. And I'd love to just see much more of, you know, you just happen to be Muslim or whatever else you are. So I'll refer back to some research I did many years ago about representations of Muslim women in the media. And we did focus groups with several women. This was based in Toronto. And one of the women said, why can't people just ask me how to compost? Just to be ordinary, you know?
I love that.
Yeah, this was
Yeah.
a long time ago, but
Yeah.
that line has stuck with me. So yeah, like, you know, why can't we just be watching some random show on CBC and the characters
Yeah.
just happens to be celebrating Eid, you know, in the background, or, you know, she's celebrating Eid, but she's also celebrating Christmas.
Yeah.
So what?
100%.
And it's not a big deal.
Mhm.
JJ, do you feel like society's ready for that?
I think so. But it's also, and maybe we can, maybe this is, you know, taking our conversation to your next question, Raisa, but, you know, it's also about feeling like sometimes we have to write for what, you know, what is the audience ready for? And I also feel like I just want to produce something and put it out there and not worry about will it have broad appeal or not. And actually my sister and I, my sister Eamon Jaffrey is a filmmaker, and we just started on a project recently that is centered around a Shia Muslim protagonist. And you know, we want to tell this story, but we feel also very cognizant that if we're putting it out there to a broader audience, how is it going to be received and perceived? And so we feel like we have to always think about that versus just telling a story. So anyway, I'll stop there for
it's
now.
because we have no representation, and this is the issue, is that there's no representation. So when there is a representation, it's normally not an accurate depiction, and it's also like narrowly, like, you know, put in this certain, you know, like pigeonholed in a certain way. And then the second someone comes out with like maybe a little bit of a different interpretation of a Muslim, everyone gets on like, that's not a Muslim representation. That's not Muslim representation. We're like, you know, there was a Netflix show, this girl, I haven't seen it, I just saw clips of it, people like ranting about it, how she took a shot to break her fast during Eid. And they're like, that's not proper representation. I said, she is a character, and she's not there to represent all Muslims. Are there bad Muslims who may have done that? 100%. So because we don't have a broad representation of Muslims, of the different, you know, like us, and then, you know, with a hijabi Muslim and what a practicing Muslim, because everyone on TV has to be practicing all the time properly. And that's the representation of Islam, is a practicing Muslim all the time who has to do it perfectly. And because we don't have a broad representation, that's what we're getting pigeonholed to. And the second it's someone's different, like strays away from that, oh, that's not representation, you know? And I think like that's why, you know, it's so hard for us to like create, because I'm, you know, creating a TV show as well, and someone who's more like me, and I might get backlash for it, but I know there's so many Muslims like me, and so many, you know, who are not super practicing, who are still kind of debating their faith, and, you know, who drinks a little bit, and who has premarital sex, or who's, you know, like, and we're out there. And I feel like people are so scared to show that on TV because we don't have the proper representation yet, or we don't have enough representation that the second we put that out there, it's just going to be bad, or, you know, it's just such, we're so stuck in a space where we're not allowed to create or put ourselves out there. So
I want to kind of riff off of that and say that there's two types of Muslim police. So there's the Muslim police of the West, which does represent Muslims as primarily being very practicing, as they just look at the debates in Quebec or in France, anywhere. It's always, if there is a Muslim, it's a Muslim with a hijab, it's a It's a kind of practicing that is immediately sort of typecast as anti-women, anti-feminist, misogynist, etc. And, you know, as if misogyny or sexism were something specific to Islam. It's something that occurs in patriarchal societies across the majority of the globe. So is there patriarchy in Islam? Yes, just like everywhere else. But it's kind of the function of that discourse is to other Muslims to a point and differentiate the West as the better, good feminists and Islam as this, you know, sort of unified, and it's not a unified, it's a diverse plural place that is kind of, you know, anti-feminist, anti-women, etc. And everything, and even the gay kind of agenda is used for that. Well, in the West, LGBTQ people are free. Are they really? You know,
Are they really?
How do you find freedom, and where in the West are you talking about? And so it creates a facile us versus them. And here the representation police is as a Western gaze. But then there's this other sort of Muslim police, and it's within the Muslim community. And
the haram police. I call them the haram police.
Well put. It is the haram police.
Yes,
and
that is.
And it kind of wields the same thing, and it's always around the body of a woman. And it's interesting because the four of us here are women creators who are in the room together, right? But I think the dynamic would be entirely different if this was maybe 2 women, 2 men, or 3 men and 1 woman. And I would just, you know, because what happens is around the body of the woman, that's where the West police is. But I noticed that within the haram police, as you call it, it's also being policed around the body of the woman. And specifically about that show, I haven't seen it, but I did see Muslim police on YouTube who was saying, like, this is haram. We don't want our children to look at this. This is not how you practice Islam. You should never break a fast like that. And women should not behave like that. And so I was thinking, it's all happening around the body of the woman. Everyone is fighting around what is Islam by trying to control the woman. Too practicing for the West, not practicing enough for the united Islam front that doesn't exist, but that some people take up. And so that disturbs me greatly. And I think it shows that as women, we have an extra responsibility when it comes to representation of you know, the plurality of Islam's that can be expressed. And I know that's seen it.
But like, why couldn't this character, like this character who took the shot, like she's not there to properly represent Islam. She's a character being like someone that someone created. She has a personality. She is somebody. She's not there to solely represent Islam. Just like how like in the South Asian community, Mindy Kaling, they put her, you know, like she represents all South Asians. That's not true. But she is the South Asian that's prominent in Hollywood because she made herself opportunities. She got there. There's, you know, and the South Asian community in Hollywood is getting bigger and stuff, but she's like the most prominent name. So right away, some people are like, when they saw Never Have I Ever, they're like, she doesn't represent us. I watched the show. I was like, I as an Arab related to this show, you know, because it's so similar. But so many people are like, no, like, but she's one person. She's one person. Like she can't represent you.
I was just going to say, I'm speaking as someone who is a viewer of the media and, you know, seeing what's on TV, because I'm not in the film industry at all, but speaking from that point of view, I have to say, I think it's when I was asking GJ about, you know, are we ready for that? I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we literally do need more women and more South Asian and more Muslim creators to come out of the woodworks and saturate the market to the point that it becomes a norm. It becomes something where we can have that conversation where it's just the average person having a convenience store, or, you know, what if you want to be typical about it or something like that, but it's not wildly abnormal to see a Muslim person working and having a normal career, having a normal life, having a normal sexual relationship, or normal, quote unquote, you know, and those things then go past the point of just focusing entirely on the fact that they're Muslim or that they're South Asian or that they're Middle Eastern or any of that. It has to be, and that we basically need to flood it. And that, I think, is why I'm wondering, are we ready for that yet? Because I feel like we haven't yet flooded the market.
But you can't flood the market because there are gatekeepers. That's why.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's people stopping that from us flooding.
Yeah.
But like, I agree with this woman that was in this, study. Why can't I like be on TV composting like a normal person and just be, like that's, as an actor, that's all I wanted to be. Just like, I want to be a normal character. Why can't I be the love interest? Why do I have to be so specific that I have to have a hijab? I have to have an accent. And I can't even tell you how many times I've had to have an accent in the last 2 years for like auditions and hijab to represent Muslims. Where are the regular characters,
And I think
so
also to speak to that as well, I think that being a mother of children who are rapidly growing into this environment and stuff, I think maybe that's where things are going to change, is in this new generation of kids that are, I don't know if it's like, it's also like my children's friends that I see as well. They seem to be a little bit more nonchalant about everything. And they're kind of like, yeah, crap's happening. I want to say the other word, but live and let live and all that kind of stuff. Their attitudes seem to be a little different. And maybe out of that group of young women and young men, there will be somebody who can help propagate this whole idea of like, let's saturate the market, maybe.
we could only hope.
Yes.
But I just want to see like different, the plurality of Muslims. I'd like to see more Bosnian Muslims. I'd like to see that. This, and I feel like embarrassed to say that this is news to me, Sunita, like that this, your history lesson was news to me. And I feel like as, a Muslim, I should have known this stuff, but I didn't. But I'm so happy that I got to connect with you and I got to learn that. So thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Like I said, I'm just, I hesitated when I was invited. I was like, do I fit, because is it enough to simply believe, whether you call it Allah or the universe, but that there is this intelligence and loving force around us that's everywhere and that permeates it? Is it acceptable to be part of the conversation if you're not practicing or if you're queer? And then I made the decision that it was important to me. And I have to say that for me, identity politics, I think, GJ, you were talking about that. And I'm really curious to ask you a question, because you'd said it's time for us to kind of go beyond the specificity of our identity politics, our religious difference, and just kind of universalize having the human experience. For me, I find it really challenging. And I think maybe it's because I have this trauma of the genocide and the extraordinary intensity, like it's like an emotional blueprint of my life. It's almost like I can't seem to just write a Muslim that doesn't have that kind of sort of intensity or complexity about them, probably because that's what I embody. And I'm just wondering if maybe what do you think about having a space where like we can do both, that we can have that like highly specific Muslim experience, but also have the dignity of just being human and flawed or whatever. I don't know what your thoughts were about like kind of attempting to do both.
Absolutely. I think that's necessary. I just find the challenge is that it is the stories of trauma that, they get fetishized. I think that, it's all of those stories are valuable and important and they need to be told. What I find limiting is that they're the only stories that seem to carry weight in the mainstream, because people either want to hear about us, experiencing a specific kind of trauma as immigrants, as refugees, either in our boxed traditional space or as, the non-traditional people who are fighting against the traditional space, but it just feels like, we have to be in that kind of identity politic storyline in order for there to be traction to either get published or be out there, versus if you are just writing that very ordinary story of someone who happens to be Muslim and falls in love, but it's not all about, her grandmother with the cute accent doing the cute immigrant things, then, is it still going to be considered an interesting story for, the consumption of the masses. And in the South Asian writers' world, there is a phrase about the mango novels. And if you look at a lot of the South Asian Canadian novels, they all have like pretty henna designs and bright yellow colors of, or mangoes or peacocks on them. And it's just an indication of, if you wanted just to have a dark cover with a flower and tell your South Asian, or, just tell your story and not have to be in that box. So that's all.
I love that. I have someone who's trying to ask a question. Oh, no, I told him to put in the chat box. He hasn't yet, so I will come back to that. My next question, because thank you, GJ, for that. That's very insightful. My next question, though, would be, is you as an artist, it doesn't have to do with, being Muslim or anything. What are your challenges as an artist? I'll let that, whoever wants to go first. Should I pick Seema?
Why did I smile down? Challenges as an artist, do you mean in terms of being, sorry, I didn't understand. Was it to be
like
as a Muslim?
No, just, I mean, we don't even have to relate it to being Muslim, but as an artist, what have your challenges been as an artist? I mean, it could be related to being Muslim, but in general, I think, all artists, we all have our struggles. What have been your challenges?
I'd say, speaking outside of whether I'm South Asian or Muslim, I think imposter syndrome is a huge one for me. I think that whole concept of, fake it till you make it, or just trying to feel like I have a message to give and that somebody will be out there to listen to it. I think that's a big one for me, to get past the struggle. And I think recently I've realized that if nobody was out there to see my work or to listen to what I had to say or anything like that, would I continue to do what I was doing? And the answer was yes. So I think that that's how I overcame that feeling, except it creeps in constantly. And I constantly have to tell myself again and again, no, this is what breathes life into you. So you have to continue doing what you're doing, despite feeling like, oh, somehow I have to make a career out of this or make a life out of this or whatever. It has to be that I have a bigger message to give to the masses somehow. And therefore I will keep going. I will keep trucking forward. Now, being a South Asian woman and then being a Muslim, the struggle gets even more intense at times, because I feel like I don't want to provoke or poke the bear or do any of those things. And that also plays into my hesitation with certain aspects, or maybe not delving into a certain layer of art that might poke the bear, for instance. So that's where my challenge is, I think.
For your parents, accepting of your art? Like, were they good with you becoming makeup artists and all that? No.
No. I had a typical Brown family, and they were very like, you will go hard at school. My dad was, like I said, he was a model minority. He studied pharmacology. He came to this country with nothing, went to U of T, did everything right. But inside, he was an artist. And that's where my abilities, I think, come from. He was a writer and he was a professor of English back in the day. And then his father basically told him, no, you need to go into science and you need to make a career for yourself, and etc. And this is just rubbish, whatever you're talking about. And I think that really is what I stuck with growing up. I heard that story about that when I was very young. And then my father started becoming his father with me and saying, you're the only child, you're the boy, you're the girl, you're the eldest, the youngest, everything. Therefore, we're putting all of our energy into you, and we expect you to be a lawyer, engineer, doctor, something like that, or go into pharmacy. And I worked in pharmacy for 10 years under my dad. So I did try it out, I guess, but it was just not for me. I have a creative spirit and I had to go in that direction. And I felt like, I think I felt like he was stifled growing up, and therefore that meant that I had to break free from that and not let myself become stifled, even though his intentions were good to, help me be a success and make sure that I'm supported in my own, whatever it is I choose to do, in the realm of what he wanted, basically. But I think, that was pretty hard. But I think my mother was much more easygoing about it than my father was. So.
Right. And so it makes me sad that they feel like being an artist is not a success, like when we live for art,
Yeah.
like everything is art around us, but it's
Absolutely.
not a good career. And I don't know why it's such a,
Yeah. And I
and
tried
those
really
reasons.
hard not to do that to my kids. I've really, really tried. I think this is where sometimes my husband and I kind of struggle a little bit,
Mhm.
where he says, yeah, I'm okay with them doing whatever they want, but I feel like he's a little bit more Desi, a little bit more South Asian when it comes to
Mhm.
that. Whereas I'm like, you do you, you figure out what makes you wake up every morning, and you figure out what that's going to be and do whatever that is. If that happens to be something like law or something like that, good for you. Great. I'm not going to, decide for you what your career is going to be. Because honestly, after doing things for as many years as I have, and realize that, also we don't need to have the same career for the rest of our lives. We can also choose to change and delve into other aspects of ourselves.
Mhm.
Whereas I feel like before it was like you choose a career path and you stick with it and that's it,
Mhm.
But I think like we're all onions where there's layers.
It's so true.
Right.
Thank you, Seema. Sanita?
I just can relate with so much of what Seema has said. It's like the essential sort of elements of what you've expressed, which is wanting to please. Even if, like, let's say your parents aren't necessarily verbalizing wanting to please them. I had that. I think that's a universal kind of, it's specific to immigrants too, and their unique sauces, but it's also such a universal thing that compels all children. And I can see it with my own child. And, not wanting to poke the bear, I think, is the expression that you use. And whereas authentic art requires us to kind of tell the truth. And you can sort of smell it when it's not happening or something is very formulaic. It's just, you've seen it all before with it's just a new coat of paint, right? And if you really want to tell a good story, that level of authenticity can be really dangerous. And so I think that's what makes great art, on top of crafting beautiful sentences or whatever it is that you would do for cinema. So I totally relate to that. For me, I'm kind of ended up doing two things at the same time. I identify as an artist scholar, so I'm a PhD candidate at Queen's University, where I also teach feminism and women's life writing in the gender studies department. So I publish academic papers, and I know JG, pardon me, you also publish academic papers and do empirical studies. So I don't do empirical studies because, one, okay, but you know how it is to get one, it's like 15 books practically. So I'm of two minds. I have that sort of very traditional kind of, it's true, somewhat like immigrant drive of like, that comes from trauma, where like suddenly in genocide, refugees, you lose everything, right? So you do kind of want a stability. You do kind of start to value education because it's scary to be living in so much precarity. And you have the illusion of thinking that that'll give me safety and inclusion and belonging. So I do have that. But actually, I ended up pursuing a PhD because I love it and I flourish in the academic setting. And I find that it just makes my writing so much more intelligent. And I don't know how you feel about it, JG, but certainly for me, I really do feel like they're both like a DNA strand informing each other.
That's so interesting, because I think I'm the reverse. I mean, I love academia in terms of like analytical thinking, but I felt like it stifled my creative side. And so I struggled during my master's degree because it didn't leave me space for the creative side. And there was one course I did on women in development where I was able to write a story in that class, and it was a terrible story, but so great to be able to get back to writing. But maybe that's just a sign that academia wasn't for me, and I didn't pursue that path. But I'm so happy to hear that for you, that it does interconnect in that way. And I mean, for me, in terms of challenges, so working full time in the public service, and then trying to create space and time, usually on Sunday evenings, to write. Like, I have to be really intentional about it, and that's one challenge. And then the other piece I find is also, I enjoy the writing part of it, but then you have to market yourself. You have to put yourself out there. You have to find spaces for your work to be heard. And I find that really challenging, and it takes a whole other layer of energy and time, and it's a whole other skill set. So I find that challenging also. And in terms of the substance of the work, as I mentioned earlier, I am conscious when I'm putting something out there for general public consumption about how it's going to be read by a non-Muslim, non-BIPOC, primarily white audience. And so, as I mentioned, my sister and I have really, it's one of the things we're talking about in our current project is we want to tell the story in a meaningful way, but we are also aware of how, if we're going to represent certain religious practices, how might they be read or misread? So that is something we keep in mind.
I think you're like preaching to the Ottawa choir when you're talking about being a public servant and an artist and trying to find time. I mean, Sunita now like has found the secret sauce to being able to quit, the daytime job and being a full-time artist and doing that. So all hail to you, Sunita. I think all of Ottawa is trying to figure that out. I'm a full-time public servant. I'd never like tell anybody that, but I'm also like almost a full-time artist as well. Like everything I do in the evenings and the weekends and my vacation time. But it's a lot of like I'm pitching TV shows and writing short films and working in the film festival, and I think a lot of the public servants are secret artists, and your sister made a documentary about that. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A because we're getting to our time. So I think, and I feel like these questions are going to be some long answers. So let's get to it. So if we go over a little 9 o'clock, I hope it's okay, just a few minutes. But they're very good questions. So the first question for all the panelists, and this is from, I hope I'm saying your name right, is Said or Sadie. For all the panelists, is there a specific author, director, or artist that really inspired you to pursue your art? So I'll give that a second. And if there's someone who wants to answer, by all means.
Hands down for me, it's Virginia Woolf. And she's a dead kind of white, upper kind of class woman, but I'll explain why. And it's because she's kind of an ideal example of the insider-outsider perspective. Wealthy but queer, operating within a very privileged circle of authors that have influence and scholars. So she's getting the best ideas, but not permitted to go to university in her time. So she's constantly insider, outsider, and she understands that tension perfectly. And imagine being white-skinned but Muslim in the West. Imagine, sort of being of Muslim heritage but a lesbian. It's just not constantly kind of being here and there, but belonging in neither one camp or the other, and constantly feeling a fluidity and porosity. And this insider-outsider kind of perspective, I just thought it was a unique struggle to me. But then I met Virginia Woolf through her writing. I didn't actually meet her in person, too bad. That's my fantasy. I read A Room of One's Own, in which she argues that women need two things to write. And this goes back to you, Maisa, and what you were saying of being a closeted public service worker. Lots of people in the closet like you, I understand, in Ottawa. And she said women need two things to create art, and that is a room of their own, so privacy away from raising kids, cleaning the house, etc., just your own room, and money, right? And is that not why most people end up staying closeted artists in the public service? it's because those two things have always been missing for women, and in particular, I would say marginalized women to this day. So Virginia Woolf, thank you for inspiring me and yeah, giving me the courage to get a room of my own and income of my own.
Yeah, I love that. That was so good. Anybody else?
So I'll go next. So Sunita, I do have a room of my own and it's amazing. I'm sitting in it right now. So yes, absolutely. I think everybody should have a room of their own separate from their bedroom. It really does make a difference. About the inspiration. So I have a couple of things. So as the makeup artist side of myself, Kevin O'Quan was a major artist that I followed all through my younger years, and his career was amazing. And just the things that he struggled with by having, I think it was a form of giantism. I'm not sure what the form, like the official name for this is, but he had that. And despite everything he was struggling with physical pain and stuff, he was one of the top makeup artists of his time. So he was definitely my inspiration to go into it. I initially, when I wanted to go into makeup artistry, it was to go into the editorial and fashion side of it. But then I realized, well, I live in Ottawa and that doesn't really work here. And I'm having, children, one child after another. So I'm not going to be, shifting to New York or Paris anytime soon. So I made makeup artistry work for me here. And I kind of dove into niching myself into the South Asian market and became the first makeup artist in Ottawa who catered to that market. So that was that. And then when it comes to the other side of my work, which is to be a mixed media artist, digital artist, writer, that actually came not so much from any single person, but I think wanting to honor the struggle that all the women before us have gone through, especially as South Asian women, as Muslim women, the fact that they were not able to speak and were not heard for year after year. And I'm talking about not just the, exquisite women that we know of, but the ones we don't know of, the ones that we didn't get to hear, the grandmothers and the aunts and all of that, like the ones who had so much to give to society and were never heard. I feel like it's my duty now to honor them by having a voice and not letting that voice be stifled by myself or by anyone else. So if that's the case, then I will keep moving forward. So that's where my inspiration comes from.
I love that. I love that. GJ.
I'd say for me, my early influences and inspirations were writers like Austen and the Bronte sisters. There's these strange kind of parallels with a lot of aspects of being South Asian. And I think the fact that, they were writing, but had to hide the fact that they were female writers, and they were writing about how they had to struggle with fitting into all of these societal expectations. So there was something about that really drew me early on, and it inspired me. And in the present day, it's like trailblazers like Marissa, you mentioned Mindy Kaling and Issa Rae, that are really taking those steps of putting work out there that is going beyond, those more, I guess, putting out the work that is giving us more depth. So I've been really inspired by both of them, and hope to follow in their footsteps.
Yes, they are so great. I like Issa Rae too. She's so great. There's a lot of, and it's funny because there was an article recently about her, how someone was telling her she had to put a white character for people to watch her show, which is sad, but a reality for a lot of executives will tell you that. Just letting you know that. So the next question, and I think this might take a little time. This is from Asim. Do you think Muslim artists who want to portray a narrative as a moderate Muslim can compete against an aggressive anti-Muslim narrative that prevails in Canada and the US? I'll repeat the question. Do you think Muslim artists who want to portray a narrative of a moderate Muslim can compete against an aggressive anti-Muslim narrative that prevails here and in the States?
I think so. And I'm thinking of the TV show Rami, for example, which I think has done well in putting forward some different kinds of portrayals of Muslim characters. And I know there have been, different kinds of critiques of that show as well, but I think it shows that there is that space to have a show out there in the mainstream that brings a bit more of that diversity. So is it easy? No, but I see potential. It gives me hope when I see.
Do you think that it's easier for him because he's a male?
Oh, well, yeah. And of course, there has been that whole issue about that show and what happened to the female writers. But I attended a seminar where, and I don't remember her name now, but one of the writers from the show who is no longer there, she's now started up some kind of an incubator and a network for Muslim female scriptwriters out in LA. So I see things like that happening. And again, it gives me a bit of that hope and energy to see that things are changing.
Mm-hmm. There are, like, I see quite a few of them, but I mean, what I mean for in terms of Rami is that like he's getting away with a lot of like things that, you know, a Muslim would normally get criticized for by other Muslims or something because, you know, what he does. But if a woman was in Rami's place as the lead doing that kind of stuff, do you think that she would get the same kind of praise that Rami's getting? He won an Emmy. He, like, you know, I don't 100% believe that to be, but
yeah, no, I have to agree with you on that one. I think we have multiple, like I said, we're onions, multiple layers to deal with, you know, being women and then being of our cultural background and then being Muslim. It's a lot more difficult. But to speak to the question, I don't think that we're quite there yet to be able to compete against that anti-Muslim propaganda that's out there. I think we're getting there. I think that it's going to be a struggle for the people who are dealing with it currently. But just like what I was mentioning, you know, that I have to honor the women before me that did struggle and did go through what they went through. Now it helps me to lead another path or open another path. The people who are doing that currently right now will have to struggle and they'll have to go through a lot in order to open the doors for the next generation of people who might be able to do it a little more easily. And then, you know, there might be another struggle that has to happen at that point. Because we're going to get to the point where we do saturate the market and we do get to the point where we can have somebody just talk about composting.
Riz Ahmed's trying to do that and like trying to put more Muslims out there, but I mean, he's one man and like, but he is the spotlight. You know, I feel like there are tons of Muslims who are trying to do this, but he's the spotlight and he is the person like that everyone is looking at, and he's the one, you know, putting a lot out there. He's starting an incubator as well for Muslim writers. He is or like filmmakers in the States and the UK with other Muslim, Rami included. He's, I think, one of the mentors. But I feel like it's always like, there's always like one person, but even though there's so many people, it's like one person that they're looking at to like make this change, when there's so many people who want to make this change, but there's like these gatekeepers who are trying to stop that, you know, but because he's famous,
they're looking at letting you just trickle in, right? Because they're too afraid of what could happen.
I think, and DJ wasn't trying to like for Rami. I just, you know, I think it's a good, like, he's a great comedian, great show. I'm just wondering, like, because had it been a woman, would it have been accepted as much as it is? You know, I know there is still some criticism about it, but I feel like as you know, if a woman was doing like all those sexual things and all, you know, putting it out there and a lead Muslim, I think it would get a lot more criticism.
I mean, We Are Lady Parts is
Oh yeah,
another good
Lady Parts.
example of something
Yes.
that's come out. And I know from, certain corners of Muslim communities, of course, there were the expected critiques, but
Yeah.
there's another example of a show that's out there that is
That's true.
pushing things, and
Yes,
like
I totally
like,
forgot about it. I love that show.
yeah, it's slowly, I think slowly things are coming out, that are good to see.
Mm-hmm. Sunita, I keep saying like you're gonna say something. Sorry, let's get you in there.
It's okay. So forgive me. It's my professor side in gender studies, but I would make the claim that it is going to be, and it is harder generally in every aspect for women because of that double standard outside of the Muslim community, but within the Muslim community itself, one does find that the woman has to kind of just perform a kind of Islam that's a little bit more traditional in order to be accepted as Muslim, at least at the level of media and representation, right? Like you said earlier, Maisa, usually to be even read as Muslim, you have to have that accent and that hijab, as you were saying when you were doing auditions. That's what's required in order to see Muslim, in order for the public to be able to read it. So if you kind of take away this visibility because the women are visible if they're wearing a hijab or a niqab, etc. If you take away the immigrant, which is beyond the borders, then what you have left is something that's too close to home, and Islam continues to be required to be outside of the borders. That is why in Quebec, forgive me, but I have to bring it back to Quebec because it's quite outrageous. You can't go to university if you're wearing a hijab. Or not university, but you can't be a judge, or you can't be a police officer, or you can't be a doctor, or any public service job. So you wouldn't be able to wear a hijab. So that kind of discrimination can only really be justified if you are kind of an alien or a foreigner or an other that doesn't belong to the kind of like culture that's pre-established, but really just like a result of like genocidal settler colonialism, but it's the established dominant culture. So we just forget about the history and the truth of that. So I think it's going to be harder to express plurality, the gendered element, multiple different kinds of sexuality expressions, skin colors, like just different tastes, different ways of living in the world, right? You might have like a really environmentalist story and the characters happen to be Muslim. Well, it's going to be a competition in terms of how you tell the story, whereas it doesn't have to be that way for example, Christianity. So I do think it's going to be more challenging, not just for women, but for like sexual minorities, Muslims are read as Muslims, etc. And that's why like every time you do write a story about Islam, for me, I think having that plurality and that inclusion of different kinds of Muslims is going to be really rich and actually as a political vehicle, a form of liberation for Muslim communities and in particular Muslim women in the West and potentially even as a result back home.
Thank you, ladies, for the answers to those questions. It's really, really, really eye-opening, and I love them. I love listening to all of you. So my last question, because we have to go, is what advice would you give to anybody, to creators, to artists who kind of feel the same way you do currently? What advice would you give them? GJ?
I don't know if this is specific to the Muslim angle, but I was reflecting on this idea, and one of my bits of advice would be to try again. And it's based on advice that a writer friend gave me. I'd submitted a story, the story that I had published in Diaspora Dialogues. In fact, I'd submitted it to them and gotten rejected. And then I workshopped the story with a writers group in Toronto. And this friend who I met through that group, it was a South Asian writers group, in fact, said, "This is a good story, you should resubmit it." And I was like, huh? Like resubmit the same story to the same group of people? And I'd revised the story, of course, and workshopped it in the group. I sent it back in and it got accepted and it got published, and I had a great experience through that. So yeah, keep trying.
That's some really good advice. Yeah, I would never have thought to resubmit either. So that's really good. Sanita?
I'm going to take your advice. But I think there's so many auxiliary advices that go with that, is that like, if you want to be a writer, you should be comfortable with rejection and not take it personally. Writing is rewriting, and writing is a collaborative act, because those are all the things you've told us through your story, DJ. But I guess if I had one piece of advice, it would be that early on in my career, I was really driven by getting published a lot, because that's, of course, how you get a kind of tangible measure of success. If you get published, that means it's good, and that means you have readers, and etc. And so I was really working towards getting published. And if I could go back in time and speak to my younger self, and so maybe someone else might find this useful on the internet, I would say, yes, it's important to get published, and that drive will never go away. But what you should really be focused on is the quality of your craft. So know that every year you're going to be better than last year, and that every time you look back, you're going to think that was really shitty and you've grown so much. So when you think about writing, you have to think about it like a marathon. It's a long game. It takes a long time to master the craft, and just be patient with yourself and really acquire a taste for quality. And in order to do that well, you have to read a lot. I don't know what it's like in cinema for screenwriters. Do you read a lot of screenplays, or do you, what do you even call them? Do you like watch a lot of films? I don't know. But if your craft is writing, then you must be a big reader. That's my only advice.
Yeah, it's so, but and you were saying like rejection, honestly, like that's the life of an artist in general. So like as an actor, you're rejected all the time. 99% of your life is rejection. You just got to keep going and do it again. And as a screenwriter too, yeah, you just got to read lots of scripts, watch lots of movies, and there's a formula there. And sometimes you want to break out of that formula as well and be more creative, and depending on what kind of films you want to make, there's art house films and stuff. But yeah, definitely really, really great advice. And that works for every part of this, artistry industry. Seema.
Okay, so I think I have a few pieces of advice. One is to remain authentic as much as you possibly can, in every step of the way. It's not to say that you shouldn't emulate your favorite artist and try to do what they do and learn from them as much as you possibly can. But in that, you still have to find your authenticity and find who you are and what your message is. I think that's one of the biggest things that as an artist, at least I've been trying to figure out on my own. And then being an entrepreneur, like we're all entrepreneurs, we all seem to be pretty much freelancers. You're kind of a blank slate, so it's really hard to navigate everything. So it's best to find mentors in your niche, whatever that happens to be. And then if you understand that you have a message to give to the world, then there should be, like what GJ was saying, don't give up, don't stop, don't let anything keep you from continuing on. Understand that the message that you have to give, as much as sometimes you might, like I said, imposter syndrome might come in, and you might have these feelings of, who wants to hear what I have to say kind of thing. You have to understand that if you could listen to other women in the Muslim community, in the South Asian community, or whatever community you're in, and you have, like, when we see that type of stuff on TV or we read it or everything, there's a light that burns inside us that gets brighter each time we see somebody from our own communities doing something big. So as those types of women, we need to, or artists in general, women or man, it doesn't matter. You have a message to give, you need to put it out there, because that burning desire is creating something inside you that's bigger than yourself. So keep going. And also, just one last thing is, there's a book called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert, I believe. I highly recommend every artist should read it. Take it with a grain of salt, of course. I mean, it comes from someone who is Caucasian and, a very privileged background, but there's a lot of information in there that could be, that you could cherry pick out of there and really work with. And she talks a lot about how we have something to give as artists, and it's a requirement or a duty that we should do it.
I love that. I love this conversation, and I'm so sad that it's over because I'm sure we could have gone another hour and keep talking. But thank you all so much. You all were wonderful. This conversation should also be continuing, outside this panel, and constantly be talking about it, as artists, as Muslims, and to change the narrative around Muslims and Muslim artists and creators. Thank you so much. This will be on YouTube after. It's currently on Facebook Live, and you can share with your family, friends. Thank you. So to everybody who has attended, who has watched, if you have any other questions.
Thank you very much. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. Good night, everybody.
Good night.